The other side of the road is safe, where we sidestep being bothered and avoid getting involved. But rolling up your sleeves and boldly going where few dare to tread, that's walking through Samaria. Each week on our podcast, we introduce you to the special few who walk in the spirit of the Good Samaritan. On behalf of the Giving Company and your hosts, David Hendrickson and Dan Riveros, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. I'm your host, Dan Riveros, with my co-host,
David Hendrickson.
Here we are, man.
Hey, good to see you, Dan.
Good to see you. It's been a little bit.
You sound pretty good behind that mask.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been in some crowds, so I'm taking my precautions here.
Is all your Christmas shopping done?
The small amount of people that got presents this year, yes.
Yeah,
I actually knocked it out. Yeah.
That's a good way to get it done. Just narrow your list.
Yeah, I made it a lot easier on myself this year. Narrowed it down.
Well, Dan, we've got a great guest today on the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Tell us about her.
She's Canadian. That's
Love
the first
it.
thing.
Love it.
She's Canadian.
Love it.
We have Danielle Strickland today.
Hey,
Danielle, welcome.
Oh, it's so great to be with you guys.
It is awesome. This is... A lot of times we love doing these face-to-face, but that's not really our COVID reality. Yeah. And Danielle's in Canada, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
So long way away. But Danielle, thanks.
No Americans allowed.
That's right. That's right. We're going to ask you how things are in Canada in a second, Danielle. But if you don't mind, I'd like to read your bio that we put together. And I'm sure many of our listeners have read your books and heard you speak. But for those that maybe haven't, like 1 or 2%, I'm gonna fire away if you're okay with that. Danielle Strickland's currently based in Toronto, Canada, with her husband Stephen and 3 boys. Her aggressive compassion has served people firsthand in countries all over the world, from establishing justice departments for the Salvation Army to launching global anti-trafficking initiatives to creating new movements to mobilize people towards transformational living. Danielle trains, advocates, and inspires people to live differently. Danielle is the author of, I got 6 books, Danielle, is that right? 6? Including Better Together, How Women and Men Can Heal the Divide and Work Together to Transform the Future. Yeah. The Ultimate Exodus, Finding Freedom from What Enslaves You. Yeah. And I love this one, The Zombie Gospel, The Walking Dead, and What It Means to Be Human. That's
very Atlanta.
She is the host of the DJ Strickland podcast, co-founder of...
Infinitum.
Thank you. Infinitum, Amplify Peace, Brave Global, and Women Speakers Collective. Wow. Among other things. Danielle, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Welcome.
Oh, yeah. Hey, it's really an honor to be with you. Thanks.
All right. So you're Canadian.
I'm Canadian, so that makes me amazing and sorry about it.
And so we should talk to you about... growing up in Canada, but like, how is Canada doing? Give us a sense in COVID time. Like, how's Canada?
Yeah, I mean, Canada is experiencing things much like our neighbors to the south, you beautiful people. So I think the difference is that Canadians are a little bit more compliant.
That's probably true.
And probably a little quieter about it as well. Yeah. So we're on Toronto right now, of course, it's the largest city in Canada. So it's on lockdown. We're all on red zone. So we can only go out for essential services and, groups of 5 indoors only. And ideally your family unit. And so I think everyone's just kind of sad, to tell you the truth. And we're all trying to cope with Christmas and all of the things that are supposed to be that aren't, and best laid plans that haven't. And, like everyone else, I think we've been waiting for the release, and it's not here, So
have you guys been this way since it hit, or did it open up for a little bit and then you went back in, or?
Yeah, it opened up and then we went back in, and then it kind of was a hybrid. They have this color system now. So like it was orange for a while, which was like restaurants were still open, but masks were required in public spaces. And
now you're red. That sounds
now
worse.
We're red. And then it's like, I think after red is gray, which is basic lockdown procedure, which I think we were gray for like a couple of days or something. I don't know. Anyway, I don't watch the news anymore because I'm just like,
I hear you.
Gosh, that's sad. I don't need to know.
Right. Yeah. Right. Oh God.
Yeah.
Well, you're this big voice for Christians and tackling the margins And I mean, I can't wait for our listeners to hear some of the things that you've done, but like nobody from Canada does that. So, you know, give us, there's 3 Christians in Canada. Give us a sense of your life growing up. Like, how'd you get on this journey?
Yeah, I mean, my early conversion, my experience with Jesus right from the get-go was all very rooted in a Salvation Army narrative.
Okay.
So my parents are both orphans rescued by the Salvation Army in different communities when they were kids.
Wow.
And kind of found this new reality, the power of God and community and love and belonging that could break sort of the, you know, the cynical statistical realities of what they had grown up with. And so I grew up really with this ethos of like, you know, God, that's how God works. Like God goes to the margins looking for people that don't belong to bring them into the center and to say, hey, let's do a new thing.
Yeah.
So that kind of just was I remember thinking to myself, like in Canada, there's this really big tradition when I was growing up, like Monday night, hockey night in Canada. And everybody would be watching the hockey night in Canada. And when I would go downstairs to watch hockey night in Canada with my dad, I would always say, everyone usually has a team that you cheer for. And I would always say to my dad, who are we cheering for tonight?
Yeah.
And then he would tell me who the underdog was. Because I think looking back, I think we always just intuitively understood that we're always on the side of the underdog. That's who we cheer for, you know?
Yep.
And I think that one little family tradition probably speaks to the deeper formation that was in my life.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Danielle, I'm trying to figure out, I've heard you speak live a couple of times, but like in the last how many years you've written another book and had another kid? Like how do you do all these things?
Well, I'm a woman.
Oh, well, that's right. That's right. I grew up with only sisters raised by a single mom, so I totally get it.
I meant that to be more lighthearted.
I totally get it. No, we're with you.
Okay. I was like, oh no. But also like I'm active, you know, I need to be active all the time. So yeah. I know this about myself. So if I wasn't doing those things, I would have been doing something else. You know, it's not like, oh gee, I should just dial it back for a little bit. It's just how I'm wired. I'm wired this way. So, that's and then awesome. Also partly, I think I often suggest, you know, I might not be doing all those things super well.
Well, so there's you seem to be doing pretty good. Yeah. So forgive the stereotypes. We're having a little bit of fun as we get started and before we dive into some really intriguing topics, but like Canada. So I think cross-country skiing, snowshoes, ice fishing. Like, have you done any of those Canadian kinds of things?
Oh yeah, I've done all those, of course. I could, and more, you know, like cabins and fishing and ice fishing. You ever been ice fishing?
Sounds cool.
Dan, have you ever been ice fishing? No, it
sounds cool.
Dan's from Colombia, Danielle.
Not so much
okay, so you got to kind of really like drinking.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of like in the middle of it. You're like, oh, I see. This is really just about drinking, not fishing.
Yeah, you pretty much just nailed it.
So, and I think the same about baseball, by the way. So it's all good. That's true. I'm always at baseball going, this cannot be about the game.
Yeah,
it's got to be about something else.
It takes forever, right?
Yeah, you're just like, oh my gosh, like this is too long. Yeah.
So of all those stereotypical Canadian sports, what's your favorite?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, you know, if I could choose a thing that I find the most exhilarating to do, I would say it would be skiing. And I have these kind of funny moments skiing. I'm a survivor skier, mostly because skiing's kind of expensive.
Right.
And I never was in a position to afford to be an avid skier. I just couldn't afford it. But whenever somebody would take me skiing or had equipment I could use and went skiing, I always think that's a lot of fun. Like just the essence of kind of the snow and the sun and the speed and you know, just, yeah, I like it a lot.
Good stuff.
But I mean, I like all the things. I like skating. I grew up playing hockey. So I played hockey in high school. That's something no one knows about me. And
you heard it here first, folks, on the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
I don't think that's ever come up in another interview. And my captain of my team, high school girls team, actually went on to be the assistant captain of the Olympic Canadian team.
Wow, that's awesome.
And so she just used to go score at will, and then we all thought we were amazing, but really it was just her that was amazing. But
that's
anyway.
Neat.
Yeah.
My wife and I have skied at Lake Louise.
Oh, yeah.
This was 25 years ago. And when we landed in Calgary, like December 22nd or something like that, it was minus 40, Danielle.
Yeah. No,
minus 40.
Yeah. I did once run a half a marathon called the Hypothermic Half Marathon up by Lake Louise. It's in Edmonton. And winter in that part of Canada is literally like waking up, you open the door and like the weather just punches you square in the face, as hard as it can, and you're just like, okay, like that woke me up and put me in a bad mood, right? In the same breath. It's just too cold. That's too cold. That's Canada trying to be hard to love.
Yeah. Well, it was beautiful and we saw a moose. So that was all good.
Yeah. That's pretty Canadian.
Well, so your story involves the Salvation Army.
Yes.
And I think, make sure I get this right, but when I heard you first speak at the Global Leadership Summit in Barrington, Illinois, you had this awesome Captain America story. And I think your book at the time was A Beautiful Mess.
Yeah.
And you were like a modern major general or something with the Salvation Army, right? You and your husband were, you have like these big time titles.
Well,
right?
Sure.
But tell us about your time at the Salvation Army, because it's I would say this is probably an American thing. Dan, I don't know what comes to mind when you think of the Salvation Army, but certainly this time of the year, it's people ringing the bells out in front of stores. Yeah. But for me at the time, before I heard you speak, before I read your book, before a few other things that we're going to talk about, I would have put the Salvation Army in this uber conservative, exclusive, Christian organization. And what you did at the Salvation Army was, I think, some things that are very good Samaritan-like and pressing at the margins like we talked about.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Sometimes in America, so I spent a couple of years living in America too, helping with some social justice.
But you left, you went back.
I did. Canada, come on. I needed some health things done. And I thought, where could I get those? No, I'm just joking. So I think that, this is a hard one. Here's what I think, that the DNA of the Salvation Army, like the origin story of the Salvation Army, is still one of the most riveting, Christian social justice dramas of that century. Like William Booth, oh my word, and his wife, Catherine Booth, who wrote an article, the first public paper ever, called Women's Right to Preach the Gospel.
Wow.
So this empowering, this is in 1865. Yeah. We're talking like way prototype before any of us ever got there. I was just telling someone the other day, William Booth stayed up at night because he couldn't figure out why we were throwing out paper. And he was like, everything's redeemable. Like God has this idea of redemption, that no one is too far gone. No one's too far lost, that God's power is enough to break the cycles of, he was so committed to this, like even paper, like he's just like, everything's redeemable. So one of his ideas to change the world was recycling. And everyone was like, no, it can't, you can't do that. And he goes, no, I think we can. So he got a person that helped him do it. So the first thing called the War Cry, which if anyone knows the Salvation Army, the magazine that they produce all around the world is called the War Cry. And the War Cry was first produced by William Booth to prove that you could recycle paper, and to make it, he employed the poor. And then on the paper, he wrote the good news of the gospel. And I would say what a
great picture, right?
That's the perfect picture of the Salvation Army right there. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So that's that DNA, that missional DNA of the Salvation Army is so infectious when you tap into it. And I would say, like any missional movement, it always gets sort of sidetracked or stuck or diverted into kind of institutionalism and maintenance and perpetuating systems and structures that really are just in the way of this missional impulse, you know? So, but there are so many, I can just dozens and dozens and dozens of people who are still in the Salvation Army who are just getting it done in these crazy, creative, amazing, ways. And I'm just always just baffled by how many missionally minded people are just selling themselves out, like just totally going for it in the ranks of the Salvation Army. Wow. It's beautiful.
And what was in the area of social justice, of serving the underdog, of reaching the margins? What was maybe your highlight at the Salvation Army?
Yeah, I had a lot. I've served in America and in Australia and in Canada and in Russia with the Salvation Army. So wow. I've gotten around with them, and then of course seen all kinds of other countries work as well. But I would say that for me personally, probably the most formative years of my life as a leader were spent in Canada's poorest postal code, trying to be incarnationally, missionally minded in the downtown east side of Vancouver.
Okay.
And I think those years are probably what I would call like my real school around all things social justice and, transformational change.
Good stuff. Wow. So, Dan, it seems like most of our podcasts, we talk about sports and Chick-fil-A.
Seems to be a recurring theme.
We're going to talk about Chick-fil-A again.
They launched in Canada.
That's
not
right.
Far from my house.
Right.
That's right. I got two Chick-fil-A's, one to the west of me and one to the south of me.
Nice. Right? Do you hit up Chick-fil-A, Dan? Are you
not regularly?
Yeah,
not regularly.
Danielle, Dan is our healthy bodybuilder. He eats well. He works out every day.
Right.
COVID's turned me into a chef. I mean, I've always liked cooking, but nice. now I just cook tons at home.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you cook?
Chicken, all sorts of different stews. Big into stews right now since it's getting a little colder.
Nice. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about Chick-fil-A to ease into this because, Danielle, starting from the times I've heard you speak, your book that I read, you do the investigation of Salvation Army, and it winds up being different from, unfortunately, maybe what some of the narratives are. Now, there's this reality of proximity. So Dan and I are in Atlanta. Chick-fil-A is an Atlanta-based employer. They spend millions of dollars on scholarships. They give away millions of dollars every year. Some of the guys on our board are very close to the Cathy family. Like there's no getting away from Chick-fil-A here in Atlanta. And
oh yeah, I've been to the big ship.
Yeah, right.
I got the tour. I saw the grand Atlanta headquarters there. It was amazing.
That's nice. Yeah. And we've had staff meetings at WinShape and I mean, it's here. And so I think it started with the boycott of Chick-fil-A many years ago. And then just recently, I think within the last year, maybe two, Chick-fil-A announced that they were going to be pulling back on some of their ministry donations and doing some other things. And I think one of the organizations that was in the collateral damage there was the Salvation Army. And the Salvation Army issued a press release about the work that they do and how inclusive they are. And we actually reached out to the Salvation Army in San Francisco. We didn't hear back. But I believe the Salvation, I'll start with maybe a general comment, give a few more specifics, and you can weigh in. But I think the Salvation Army is the largest provider of services to homeless LGBTQ youth in the country. And I think like the statistics are 1 out of 4 LGBTQ youth are homeless.
Wow.
Or 1 out of 4 homeless youth are LGBTQ, one of those. But This is if you do some investigation for all our listeners, like it's so strange how you have to sort through the narrative to find the data. But here's what the Salvation Army said about things that they do. They serve more than 23 million Americans every year. In every zip code of America, services are offered without discrimination. Almost 1/3 of homeless transgender people have been rejected from an emergency shelter. When a transgender person seeks help from the Salvation Army, they serve them in the same manner as any other person seeking assistance. So here's my stat. Salvation Army is the largest provider of homeless shelters to LGBTQ youth in America.
Wow. Yeah, look, I always field a couple questions on my website usually about this every Christmas time, because it seems like Christmas time is when it comes up. And I actually met my husband serving soup to homeless youth in Boys Town, downtown Toronto, through the Salvation Army. So all my ministry was to LGBT youth, young boys, like young men especially. And that's really when I remember, like, night after night after night, hearing the stories of these guys who would say, almost all of them, they were from Christian homes.
Oh, gosh.
And when they had come out, they had been, and I remember just even from those days, just being so horrified by a type of Christianity that would prefer to see their kid on the street than, you know, wrestle through the realities of, like, we don't really get what's going on and we don't even know what to feel about it, but you're still welcome here. Like, I couldn't fathom that then, you know. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful for those experiences, actually, because when later on, when it became a big thing, I didn't understand the thing, because the only thing that was informing my thing were these stories after stories after stories of kids that had been
real
kicked out
life.
And I just was like, I don't understand what the dilemma is. Like, either we love people or we don't love people. Like, I understand that it's hard and we don't always agree and there's tension, but I don't understand how we could be so filled with rejection. And anyway, so I, you know, right from the very beginning, and then of course there's a transgender shelter the Army opened in Las Vegas that my friend oversees, and of course all kinds of human trafficking stuff. They opened the first AIDS shelter in LA, in California, way back in the 80s, when, like, no one was touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Exactly.
So I think, you know, I mean, I don't know how that happens, and I'm sure that there are some within every organization. There's some people who, you know, have weird beliefs, or who have someone's been treated unkindly at the front desk by a person who has other, but in terms of a general missional impulse, like, we're literally designed to welcome people who don't belong. Yeah. I mean, that's what we do.
Right.
It's who we are.
Such a good picture of Good Samaritans. Can you give an assessment? And I realize, like, generalizations without conversation and research and engagement are not necessarily good, but give a grade, give a letter grade, A through F, of your neighbors to the south on how Christians are doing loving others not like themselves.
Well, I'm not going to grade you, because I believe in positive affirmation. So I don't think that's going to go to a positive place. But listen, I mean, actually, let me tell you this. I always say this about my American brothers and sisters. You're extreme. Like, you're crazy good at this. And then there's a whole bunch of you who are not. But you're not just, like, not okay at it. Yeah. You're terrible at it. So I feel like all my Americans are either amazing or terrible at the same thing. Yeah. Because you're just good. Extreme in what it is that you do. So that Canadians are kind of mediocre at it all the time, you know, whatever it is. And even, like, our politics, right? Like, even our right-wing politics are like your center, because no one has the nerve to go all that way, you know? So
Gotcha.
I think that it's the same when it comes to these things with the church in America. You're just extreme. You guys are extreme. So
that's right.
You're the best. You're the best.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're the best in some of this stuff. Honestly, like, I've never seen such hospitality and and many of these things I've mentioned, even with the Salvation Army, are in America, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So just beautiful, beautiful displays of radical inclusivity, like, just, that make Jesus proud. I'm sure of it. And then you have this, like, weird thing going on with, like, anti-masks and government and power. Like, I mean, it's just like, what on earth are you guys doing? You know, I don't know. Like, Trumpism, like, what on earth?
Well, if you know anybody in the San Francisco location of the Salvation Army, tell them we're looking for them, because we think they have great stories to tell about what you said, just radical love and radical service and doing it the way
I think Francis Chan has become quite a spokesman for the Salvation Army over the years in his work in San Fran, because he's been like, what on earth? Like, these guys have been doing this? What? Where have I been? I often call the Salvation Army the best kept Christian secret, because the world usually knows about them a fair bit, but the church seems pretty in the dark.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, could you tell us, what is aggressive compassion?
Yeah, you know, the term actually comes from the founder of the Salvation Army, Catherine Booth. She wrote a book called Aggressive Christianity. And it's a lecture, it's a series of preaches that she gave when women couldn't preach. And really, it's this idea that you'll hear remnants of this in Martin Luther King Jr.'s sort of, if love is sentimental, it's anemic and can't change a thing. And if power is abusive, it's reckless and can only damage things. But love perfectly matched with power is a force for good. And I think that's what I mean by it, is love perfectly matched with power, not sentimentalism, and that's sometimes I think that's just, we've lost what love is. Mm-hmm. But that compassion, the scriptural idea of love that is moving people. Jesus moved with compassion, literally in his bowels, like he can't stop himself. I think I'm trying to capture a little bit of that word compassion, that word love in action.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. Well, Danielle, in what I've heard from you and the research we've done on you, I mean, you get in there and do it. I remember, Dan, when we had Chris Pulaski from Bethany Christian Services on the podcast, and his family for like 15 years would move to where all the natural disasters were around the world. And so he's serving people after tsunamis and earthquakes and droughts and famine. And like, that was his family's story. I mean, to some extent, you've done a very similar thing. You have leaned into fighting sex trafficking, poverty, homelessness, discrimination. I think the Captain America story, you were on your way to a prison, if I remember correctly. You lean into these things. You live out this aggressive compassion. The stories of the underdog, I mean, the stories are what brings this home. Are there a couple, one or two uber redemption stories that you will always remember from this time where you've been providing aggressive compassion?
Oh, absolutely. There's some that I just can't forget. Actually, my latest book is sort of, I hope, going to have a compilation of some of these stories, because I think stories might just be the remedy for what is ailing us right now in terms of fighting back against cynicism and despair, right?
Yeah.
And every time I think, to myself, based on a steady diet of fear, I guess, in the culture in which we live, I just remind myself about people I know who have changed their minds, and their lives have changed and become a great light in this world. So just last Friday night, a good friend of mine, Tanis Ryan, died of a heart attack. And she's one of those stories. I mean, so all week long, I've been looking, through all my pictures, and sort of there's a memorial page for her, and just kind of thinking back about what a grace gift the last 7 years of her life has been. So I want to say maybe 8 years ago, I met her on a street corner selling herself in Edmonton, Canada, on the Strip. And she was by far the worst case I'd ever seen. And that's saying something. I've been doing this my whole life. Wow. But she was HIV positive. She's Hep C. She lost the use of her legs because of an abscess from drug use. She was a skeleton. It's freezing cold. She's on crutches with a hood up every time she would step into this ministry van that we ran. I mean, it was just darkness entered the van, And my friend Christine said to me, just after she got out of the van one time, she said, "Oh, I think God spoke to me." And Christine's not much of a God spoke to me person. She's more of a like, "Where's the sandwich? Thanks for your prayer, but like, I want to give him something real."
Right.
And so when she said that to me, I was like, "What? Like God spoke to you? Yikes! What's going on?" And she said, he told me that Tanis, whose street name is Pocahontas, he told me that Pocahontas is going to be an example of what he can do.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember, I always say to leaders, this is how you know that you need a little bit of refreshment in your own soul, because I immediately started to pray, "God, please protect Christine when we come here next week and find her dead." You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of faith level I had at the time, which maybe I needed a retreat or something. But anyway, so I faked it because that's what leaders do. So I was like, "Oh, that's nice. You should pray for her," kind of thing.
Right.
But internally, I was just steeling myself for this like hopeless situation.
Oh, gosh.
And anyway, it kept going. Every time she would get on the van, Christine, before she would get off, she'd go, "Let me pray with you," which also was like, she never prayed out loud, Christine. And literally like the extent of the prayer would be like, "God, help Tanis, that's it.
Amen. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a couple of weeks later, she just got on, and every single time she would get on, we would say to her, let us take you to the hospital. Let us take you to the hospital. Because it was clearly she was dying,
Oh gosh.
And she would say, no, because we didn't know this, but there was a warrant out for her arrest. So she was looking at about 20 years of jail time if she went to the hospital.
Okay. Wow.
So, which is why a lot of people don't go to hospitals. But anyway, so this one time she gets on the van and Christine says, God, and then in the middle of like the sentence prayer, Tanis goes, well, would you just take me to the hospital already? And on the way to the hospital, she said this to Christine, if your God's real, he can make a way for me to keep my legs. Because she was prepared to amputate her legs, right? Because that's what they said.
Oh my God.
So Christine looks at me and I look at her and I'm like, well, I didn't get the word. So I don't have any faith.
Yeah,
so
this is your thing, Christine.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Christine's like, God, save her legs, literally like that's it. And we get to the hospital and like 10 minutes later, they come back and they're like, actually, we got good news. I think we found a way to save your legs. And then I remember Tanis looking at Christine with these wide eyes, just going, holy shit, like your God must be real. And I thought that's like maybe the most faithful statement I've ever heard in my whole life.
Exactly.
Yeah, like this might be real. Yeah, and on this went until she was free. And she came all around the world with me testifying about the story. And she was an ambassador for this thing we do called Brave Global, which inspires young girls before they're trafficked. And she's just such a witness to the power of God and also the kind of power that's at work inside of people that have been disturbingly covered up, by oppression. So that's one of those stories. That's never, ever leaving me.
That is just an incredible story.
Yeah, that was
an incredible story. This is a little off script, but just hearing this, Danielle, we've been fortunate, Dan, to kind of get involved with people who are fighting sex trafficking. Yeah. So Mary Frances Boley and the Wellspring Living Organization here in Atlanta, Crisis Aid International, which is headquartered in St. Louis. We've been to East Africa, to the red light district, to try to rescue girls. We've seen girls that were rescued, graduate from vocational school. I mean, just moving. Christine Kane's involved with this. You're involved with this. Because you are a woman, Danielle, as you said at the very beginning, what's the catalyst where people like you and Mary Frances and Christine go after this? I mean, this is one of the toughest, most excruciating, miserable issues on the planet when it comes to the dignity of girls. What is it that happens in your spirit, in your heart, in your walk with Christ that causes you all to lean in?
I think it's time. I actually think it's time. Like that, you get these. I think generationally this happens where, God has his finger on an issue, that he wants to change and he wants to shift. I feel like, when he spoke to Moses, what he said to Moses was not that he was ticked off and tired of Egypt. What he said to Moses was that he had heard the cry of the oppressed. So I think when God moves like this, where he's clearly saying the same thing to a whole lot of people at the same time, it's him saying, I've heard the cry. I just I can't take it anymore. We have to respond. So I think, and then every one of us personally would have our own aha moment where we felt God say to us, I've heard the cry. Now you do too. So for me, it happened just by being frantic. I just was in the situation where I ran into trafficking survivors, not even knowing what they were, or how to even describe. And then as I started listening to their stories, they all were the same. And then I started realizing, oh, wow, like this isn't just something that happened that's horrible to one person. This is happening all over the place to a whole, like this is a systemic problem. And that was me going like, whoa, wow. And that was my call, just this like stumbly bumbly into this thing with real people and just going like, I got to do whatever I can do to help. But then as I grew in that calling, I realized that this calling's everywhere. Like it's all over the globe. I mean, this is what's, I think, so remarkable. Like in governments, it's like, there was like a whole decade where you couldn't even probably get through a week without hearing something about trafficking. And I think that's God. I think that's the Holy Spirit, amplifying the cry, exposing the oppression. And then I think when you're in tune with what it is that God is doing in the world, you're just like, okay, I'm in. Like, count me in. What do you want me to do in this movement that you have in mind to free and to stop this oppression? So I think and I honestly think, big part of why we did Brave the way that we did Brave was really not to make Brave the hero, but to make every local church potentially a partner, a hero of that community, and trying to get the vulnerable girls before they're trafficked. And that needs to be, that much more than us being the heroes. Isaiah 61 says that they will rebuild the ancient ruins. And who are they? It's not us. It's those who have been set free. It's those who have been experienced the healing, miraculous power of God. They're the ones that are going to be raised up. And so in many respects, that's what I try to do, is get out of the way as the dominant story, so that we can get folks that need to rebuild these ruins and get rid of this oppression, to get them to the center of the story.
That's good. That's good. We went to, as I mentioned, to East Africa with Crisis Aid International, and I would totally agree, Danielle, that the heroes of those stories are those girls that have made a decision to step out of their, existing situation and get on a different path with God's help, and their stories deserve to be told, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, but I think that this trafficking, so probably a couple decades ago, the trafficking thing became highlighted and everyone was sort of like, whoa. I mean, all of us were like, whoa, like this is worse than we thought. And we can't even hardly comprehend how systemic this is. And then, of course, like any systemic injustice, it's deep, it just keeps going. The roots of that system are so deep. And so I think even in this, last few years, we're seeing some of the Me Too movement, for example, just women in general, just starting to speak about the oppression they've experienced. And, that's one of those tentacles that makes trafficking work, isn't it? That women are silent and suffer in silence and don't speak up and have no voice and aren't heard. And so I just think, I was at this Brave conference one time and we had an MMA fighter come and give her testimony and then teach us how to protect ourselves and break an elbow of a rapist. It was really cool.
Wow, cool.
But I know, but one of the things that she said was she shared her own sexual abuse story when she was 10. And it was the first time she'd ever shared it publicly at this Brave conference, because she said, I'm asking you to be brave. I thought maybe I should match the invitation. And she's shaking, she's just like an MMA fighter. I mean, she's like legit, really scary person. And she's just shaking, she's telling the story. And she said it wasn't until she was in MMA training and self-defense that her trainer said to her, the first way that you defend yourself is not physical. It never is. The first way that you defend yourself, your first line of defense, is your voice. You should speak. You got to say something. So then she said to the girls, repeat after me. She just gave them phrases to say when they're at parties or at school or if they're on the subway and somebody puts their hand on, just things to say out loud. Yeah. I was sitting in that conference. There's about 1,000 girls in LA. And I just remember it was I was transported. I was just like, aha, I had a revelation that finding the voice, just finding your voice is the first line of defense. Yeah. And all of a sudden it made sense. A lot of this Me Too movement stuff made sense. Women just finding their voices is going to be actually one of the ways that the battle is going to be advanced, let alone girls finding their voices, so it was just, anyway, just super powerful. I think a lot of the other things that are happening these days are just sort of these root systems that are going to actually loosen the oppression of trafficking.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think some of your comments are kind of opening the door for this next one. So, Dan, we started with ice fishing, and now we're really into the thick of the real ministry, right?
The lighthearted conversation.
It's not Jesus chicken. It's these things. Yeah, but women, abuse, oppression. The second time I heard you speak was at the same Global Leadership Summit at Willow Creek Church, and it was right after the church had a major blow up with their senior team. So senior pastor resigns. He had announced his successors. They resign. the elders resign or get fired. I can't remember how it went down, and I don't want to get that wrong, so I'll leave that open-ended for the purposes of this conversation. And a lot of people were boycotting the church, boycotting the Global Leadership Summit, which I think in its history, despite the actions of the founder of that summit, had served girls and women probably fairly well. And you agree to speak at the very first one after the blow up.
Yeah. Right in the middle, really.
Yeah.
Of all that stuff.
Yeah. It was still going on. And I am thankful to you and Craig Groeschel because I got to imagine you took some hits, and I wouldn't mind if you would talk about that a little bit. But what was it that caused you to give the Better Together message? And, did you experience some collateral damage because of your decision to go ahead and step up and stay on the faculty?
Yeah, so it was for sure the hardest thing I've ever done in terms of pushback, and lots of people had opinions and expressed them, and campaigns were done, like that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it was the first one where it was like sort of personal, But here's what happened. I'll just tell you why I did it and how it happened. Is I was praying as soon as I heard that had happened, and more of the reports. So the first report came out, and it kind of was like, it was what it was. Mm-hmm. I started praying then and asking God how I could serve. I mean, I love these people. I'm friends with these people. I'm friends with Bill Hybels. I thought he was a great, fantastic leader and has done, so many beautiful things in the world. I'm so grateful for him even still.
Yeah.
And I was praying, just what can I do to serve? What can I do to help? And then I felt like God said, offer. You can offer to help. Mm. And then I thought to myself, wow, that's weird. Like to offer to help, that's
where's Christine? Let's get Christine.
Right.
In here
I was like, that's a weird thing to say and to do. And then I felt like, this push with God, well, you asked, and I'm like, I know, but I wanted a different answer, So anyway, I thought I better listen, because that's, one thing I've learned over the years is just, if you listen to God, it's probably a positive thing. So I just started to write an email, dear GLS team, the person that was in charge. I've been praying for you guys and sensed an invitation to offer to help. Let me know if I can be of any help. I'm in the middle of this email. I have not sent it. And I get a phone call from the same person.
Oh my God.
And he says to me, we just got out of a prayer meeting, and the Lord said to us, call Danielle. And we were wondering if you could help. And I was like dumbfounded. I was just like, I am literally about to press send on an email.
You just got hit over the head with a 2x4 from God, right? I mean, that's as real as it gets.
And I think that if it wasn't like that, I might not have known. I might not have been able to be so strong in that moment, because it was so clear to me from that very phone call, for the email, the God had spoken to me that this was a moment. Because what I really was praying about was, I think that out of fear, somebody like Bill Hybels, with that happening, the backlash of that happening was not going to be against men. It was going to be against women. Mm. And everyone was going to, recall back into that. We knew it. We knew we shouldn't be empowering women. We knew that was a bad thing to do.
Oh, I see.
And that's my panic wasn't necessarily for Bill, although, I pray for him too, and still appreciate him as a leader. But my panic was, this is going to set us back so far, And so that was really what I had in mind, was how can we actually address this for what it is, instead of pretending it's something else. Mm.
So I think the talk came before the book, right? Do I have that?
Yeah,
right?
The talk is the premise for the book. Basically, I had 27 minutes to say why men and women could still work together, and it was a good idea in light of the scandal.
Yep.
And in the current climate, because it wasn't just Hybels that was going down, it was all kinds of people, right? It's the Me Too movement. I mean, it was the exposure. It was a Pandora's box of a generation.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine the research that went into that. And then, of course, there's so much to say. And I just kind of had to pick the 27-minute spot and do the best I could to address the core issue. But there was so much more. So the book Better Together is the more of the 27-minute talk.
So the official title is Better Together: How Women and Men Can Heal the Divide and Work Together to Transform the Future.
Yeah.
Can you give our listeners a little bit of what the book is trying to say and what has the impact been since the release of the book?
Yeah, I mean, sure, I can try. The book is basically a call to reconciliation another way, so we can live in reaction our whole lives. And the temptation, of course, just like you're seeing in racism and in politics right now in America, is this just a polarization. And I could sense that happening, like those that are for women or those that are against women or those that are pro women and those that are pro men, and like it's us versus them. And I'm just like, this is literally the opposite of the gospel. Quite literally. And right from the very beginning of the gospel, of course, the church was always called to be examples, to be reconcilers, to say like, this is how you're supposed to live together.
Yeah.
So I just refuse to believe this is too hard. I think this is the gospel work. This is what the cross is for. So the book is basically a call and then a map, how we get to, first of all, believe it's possible, which I think is step number one, because I really thought I think we've come to this like despairing, cynical, hopeless situation between women and men. And I'm like, I refuse that. I'm the mother of 3 boys. I'm married to an amazing man. I just cannot give up on them. It's not possible.
Yeah.
And I can't give up on any, we can't do this. This isn't the church's work. So it's a call to believe it's possible. And then a map. How do we get to a place where reconciliation is real, but then also we're modeling the way for a world that's desperate to know how. They already know how to blame and shame. They all know about guilt and fear. What they don't know about, which is, of course, the good news, which is our job to bring them, is how to live a different way.
Yeah.
So if ever there was a moment, and this is the book, if ever there's a moment for the church to rise up to say, we know how to do this, it's now,
Mm-hmm.
So it really is a call to church leaders and leadership teams to rethink some of their practices and maybe even just the systemic ways that they're not even aware that they're excluding women.
Yeah.
And then also just a call to model something different and ways we could do that. So the impact of the book, I don't know. I mean, it got some people talking for sure. I know the talk had a fair bit of power to it.
Yeah.
I normally would be all around the world speaking at events. And so that might have helped that conversation, but of course haven't done that this year. So
right.
It's not much of a book tour. Yeah. So, but I mean, it like everything, and I guess this is the other half of the question you asked me earlier, like, I'm not trying to, I don't really have anything to lose in this life. I'm not trying to gain some weird reputation. I don't think of myself that highly. Like all I want to do is be someone that just goes full out and does whatever God tells me to do and hope that it will extend his kingdom. That's it. So,
and you're sharing your perspective though, and you're sharing your learnings and you're sharing your stories. And I think that's such a productive use of your walk, I think.
Yeah, just passing it on. And also for me, the book is really just an offering. Like, is this helpful? Is this, and it's strong, but that's, that's how I roll. I'm just, I even tried to dial it down a little. So if you can imagine, if you read that book, if you haven't, give it a read and you'll see that's me dialed down.
It's interesting. My personal experience has been so different from what I think people would call the narrative, whether it's the political narrative here in the U.S. or the church narrative or whatever. I was raised by a single mom. I had only sisters growing up. Family went through a bit of trauma, so I watched the girls because they were older. I was the youngest. I was the baby boy. I watched the girls step up, right, and lead and manufacture a positive outcome. My first job out of college, the leader of that business for a major Dow Jones Industrial 30 company was a woman, Dr. Mary Gum. When I came to Atlanta to work for McKesson, the leader of that business was Pam Pure. I mean, I guess I just was fortunate or blessed or both to just through my eyes and my experience see something very different than what society was kind of talking about. In some cases, it makes it uncomfortable, but I'm certainly grateful that I did have the experience that I did where really strong women were doing pretty amazing things.
Yeah, we have that in common because I also have that experience growing up in the Salvation Army, of course, an egalitarian organization, led several world leaders, Salvation Army, like no limit to women. I had lots of female models. I mean, leadership was, of course, a part of what I saw, so it was normal. And it was really in the Women's Speaker Collective, a lot of the boot camps that I did, which are trainings for women communicators, that I would hear this dominant, over and over again, like 90% of the participants say these heartbreaking realities, like their dads, saying to this one girl, she said, when I was a little girl, my dad was like, you could do anything. You could be president of the United States. And then she had this experience with God at a youth camp and came home and said, I know what I'm supposed to do with my life. I'm supposed to preach. And her dad saying to her, oh no, honey, that's the one thing you can't ever do.
Oh no. Oh my God.
Like you heard God wrong. God couldn't have said that. And over and over and over again. And you're just like, how is this even possible? Like, it's so. But what I started realizing that in the research, the more I looked into this, oh my gosh, the more my heart broke at the reality of this, because all the research says that a girl's self-confidence, a woman's self-confidence will peak in our cultural norm in a Western culture at 9 years old. Mm. A girl at 9 will be the most self-confident she'll ever be in the rest of her life.
Wow.
Because of the way that society works and puberty happens in high school and then life, right? Yeah. It's just 1 in 3 girls will be sexually harassed. I mean, it goes on and on. And the more that I researched it for this book, the more I just was like, oh, my heart's going to die here. Like, how is this possible? And how also have I been so ignorant of this? I mean, anyway, I realized that I'm the exception, not the rule. And then what I realized is I don't want to be the exception to the rule. I want to change the game.
That's right.
That's when, a lot of this impetus for Better Together and Women's Speaker Collective started happening for me.
Yeah. It's part of the tragedy of Willow Creek, right? Is all the phenomenal female leaders that came through there. Nancy Beach was my wife's boss. Nancy Ortberg, preached from the pulpit at Willow. Leanne Mayato, amazing leader. Corinne Ferguson, amazing leader. Vonda Dyer, amazing leader, Yeah. And all of a sudden it blows up. So again, I want to say thank you on behalf of that community for stepping in for all the right reasons. Like you said, what if we have this pullback and all the progress gets destroyed? Like that would be tragic. So.
Well, and I think this is what good leaders do. And this is a testament to all the really good female leaders who are still at Willow. And even the Global Leadership Summit, the GLN, it's filled with good women leaders.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why it works.
Yep.
Even to this day. So I just think there is a place we can get to. And I guess maybe that's the crux of where we do say this is not acceptable. We hold leaders accountable. And there's a whole thing about that in terms of exposing the Hercules myth and how we're all prone to believe there's some human that's better and different and greater than any other human who's ever lived, like they're on an ascension path, right? Which is our addiction to celebrity culture.
Yeah.
And how we have to expose that. We hold that person accountable, but then at the same time, we're not just going to boycott. We're not just going to abdicate. We're not just going to fall away. We're going to press into this place and figure out a way forward together. And that's the real tense place, right? That's hard, but it's good.
That's right.
Yeah. So keeping in the same vein of not giving up on anybody here, maybe as your neighbors in the South, could you give us a little good Samaritan aggressive compassion advice? Tell our listeners how to mobilize around compassion, or the church needs leaders in compassion, right?
Yeah, get out of your heads, man.
Right. I'm trying.
This is really for your neighbors to the South, Danielle. This is your opportunity to help us get it right.
Get out of your heads. You're all in your heads. It's, this is the worst. I mean, if you're in you do any recovery work at all with addicts, one of the first things they'll do is say, stop thinking about it and just start doing some things. Mm-hmm. And I would say literally, if I could help American Christianity with its recovery program, I would say, get out of your heads, stop thinking about it, and just start doing some things.
Yeah.
And the picture I had many years ago for the whole church, actually, the Western church, but particularly I feel this way with America, is I saw this little stick man figure with this massive head. and every time the stick man would try to take a step forward, it would fall down on its head. It was constantly picking up its head, and the head was this major. And I just felt like God said to me, we don't need more Bible studies. You don't need more things to stuff into your heads. You need to practice what it is you already know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no, even regardless of where you are in the political divide, no one thinks the Good Samaritan was just a suggestion. Everybody agrees it's Jesus's, demonstration what the kingdom looks like. So just go serve some people. And if you just start serving some people and stop yelling at each other, your witness will be recovered. That's it. That's all you got to do. The mission is where the unity happens, right?
Start serving some people and stop yelling at each other.
Yeah.
We need to write that one down, Dan.
I like
it. That's it. That's it. Well, Danielle, this has been just a delight. And I've even learned some things as much as I've stalked you, online and researched you and read your books and those kinds of things. I've learned some new things today, which has been really refreshing. I got to imagine our audience is super excited about Danielle Strickland and the things that you're doing and the things that you've written and resources and content. Where can they find you online? How can they follow you? How can they do something?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, it's daniellestrickland.com. And I'm on all the social media stuff as well, just Danielle Strickland. And I mean, I got I'm spinning out some really beautiful, fun things coming up here next year, which I'm really excited about. And we'll have to have another conversation sometime about that. But
Perfect. Sure. Perfect.
But I also, just let me say this at the very end. I really love Americans. And I think the American church really does have a moment in its own recovery to really show what this blessing of being a Jesus follower is to the world. So I am praying and cheering for you guys and with you in the fight.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
Thank you, Danielle.
Well, to all of our listeners, this has been a blast. Danielle Strickland, thank you so much for joining us. Try to stay warm over the next few months. You and your family stay safe from COVID. Merry Christmas. Thank you so much for joining us. That's it for today on the Walking Through Samaria podcast. This is David Hendrickson and co-host
Dan Riveros.
So great to be with you.
Thanks, guys.
For more content like this, visit us at givingcompany.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Walking Through Samaria.